I'm Tyler Burns. This is my cousin Alec Eagon. We're at Patrick Ewing's studios in Portland, Oregon with Paul Stubblebine.
That's me.
Very well-known mastering engineer who lives in San Francisco and also owner of The Tape Project, boutique record label releasing on quarter-inch, half-inch, and even on one occasion the 1-inch
That's amazing.
format.
Analog 2-track, yes.
What
Yeah.
what recordings were purchased on that?
I'd have to go look it up. The customer bought 2 of our titles. We have 29 titles out now, and number 30 is going to be released in the next couple of weeks.
So
He
cool.
chose 2. Out of that, I think it was 2. It might have been 3. And I don't remember what he chose.
Yeah, oh, that's great.
So we're here today primarily to discuss the 1-inch 2-track format, which is a very esoteric format, only a handful of these machines in the world, and Paul is a bit of an expert on these machines. What do you like about the 1-inch 2-track format as opposed to the half-inch or the quarter-inch mixdown format?
There's a couple things. To my ear, and this we're talking about sonic impression of a music recording. It's bigger, it's wider and deeper. There's essentially a complete absence of noise, which means if the music is layered, you can hear deeper and more layers. And there's just a total ease to the dynamics.
That's interesting. I was just listening to it. Can you hand me that CD real quick? I just got the CD in the mail, and I didn't know that you had mastered it, actually. And this is a meeting by the river with Ry Cooter and Bot. I think that's how you...
VM Bot.
Oh, VM Bot, right.
Vishwa Mohan Bot.
Right. Well, I had never heard of him. He's a famous Eastern musician. He plays the, was it the Mohan Veena?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is a slide guitar.
Slide guitar, essentially. And this was recorded live to the 2-track 1-inch format. Was it on a C37?
Yes.
So C37 Studer machine that was rebuilt by Tim Paravicini of Esoteric Audio Research. So this is about as pure of a recording as you could possibly make. This is done at 15 IPS IEC, right?
15 IPS, but when Tim Paravicini initiated the 1-inch 2-track format.
Right.
You know, he's an audio designer and manufacturer in England, makes both recording equipment and playback equipment. And he decided that this would be an advance in sound quality. He rebuilt these C37 Studers, and he made a custom curve. It's very close to the IEC curve, just slightly more so, without getting too deep into the technicalities.
Fair enough.
So he was recording using Tim Paravicini's curve, which again is functionally pretty close to equivalent to the IEC curve.
Wow. And one thing, we were talking about this, one thing I noticed with this recording and another one that I've recently listened to with the 1-inch 2-track format is that, especially at 15 IPS, is that, or was this 18 IPS?
No, this was 15.
Okay, this is 15 IPS.
Yeah.
Is that the low end is absolutely gigantic sounding without having to turn the level of the bass up. So you can actually have a relatively low bass level on the mix in terms of the fader, but it still sounds huge.
That was the first thing we noticed listening to the 1993 Sheryl Crow record. Was nothing was in the way of anything else, but everything was huge. And particularly with some of these more sparse arrangements that had upright bass and stuff like that, it was gigantic, but it just wasn't getting in the way of anything, which was the thing that just blew me away about the format. Is that as you were saying in there, that there's a discreteness and kind of, the word you use, ease, that just rings in what I'm hearing just in just being barely exposed to this.
Yeah. Now, I'm a guy that likes tape as a recording medium for music in the first place, and I like quarter-inch, I like half-inch even a little better, and I like 1-inch better yet.
Fair
It
enough.
has more of everything I like about half-inch and quarter-inch.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I see.
And the complete absence of noise is a real bonus too. Not that I even hear tape hiss as a problem when I listen to quarter-inch or half-inch. When everything's done carefully, it's really not a noisy format. But there's more than one kind of noise in tape recording. We think about hiss when we talk about noise, but there's another one called modulation noise, which is noise generated by the signal, normally the low-end signal especially. And that can put a little puffy cloud around things. So the less the better, and we bias our machine specifically to get the least of modulation noise. And the 1-inch format just seems to take it to a whole nother level of getting rid of modulation noise.
Oh, I see.
And I think that's why it can give you this three-dimensional quality in the bass. The bass isn't just there, it isn't just the notes, it isn't just loud, it has shape and heft. It feels like you could pick it up, it's got weight to it. And the lower modulation noise, in my estimation, has a lot to do with that. Why the 1-inch does a better job of that than the half-inch, and why the half-inch does a better job of it than the quarter-inch.
And now you were telling me about switching from 30 IPS to 15 IPS, or I was asking you what speed did you prefer for half-inch, 30 or 15?
Yeah. When I started using half-inch, it came on the scene in the 70s and was available. A lot of studios tried it out. Many people liked it. A few people preferred the sound of quarter-inch, but the majority of people liked half-inch. But at that time, a lot of people were also experimenting. Well, should it be 15? Should it be 30? And most people heard 30 as having a little more transient snap and keeping a little more liveliness of the music. That's how I heard it. Many people described it in similar terms. And so a lot of people using half-inch used 30, and you give up a little bit in solidity of the low end, but it's not too bad. Half-inch has a more solid low end at 30 than quarter-inch has, so it was a pretty good trade-off.
Yeah.
And that's what many people chose. Over time, I changed my opinion about this. What happened was I started working with better electronics. Up to this point, it had all been whatever the manufacturer put in the deck. Ampex provided the record and playback electronics with the Ampex decks. Studer provided the record and playback electronics with their decks, and that's what you used. And that's the way records were made. There weren't many people customizing the electronics of the tape machines they were using. But when I started to investigate that, I found that at 15 IPS you could keep all that transient life and snap. It had just been trying to muscle that liveliness through soggy electronics. I don't engage in brand worship. I love the Studer transports, but I don't have good things to say about the audio quality of their electronics. And I think the Ampex ATR-100, one of my favorite machines ever made. The record electronics I'm perfectly happy with. I think the playback electronics are not quite up to snuff. And when I started trying other electronics, I found it could be every bit as lively at 15, and then we got the extra solid low end as well. So now just about everything I do is 15. In the tape project, that's our label. Two of us, by the way. I founded it with 3 people, and there's 2 of us left, not just me. And the other guy's a mastering engineer as well, Michael Romanowski, my partner in the tape project. We make our running masters at 15 IPS on 1-inch 2-track. We copy them real time to a bank of ATR-100s, usually quarter-inch, running 15 IPS. So we like 15 IPS just fine. We work from the original masters, and those are whatever the producers and engineers chose at that time. Some of the stuff we've gotten in was half-inch 30. Some of it was quarter-inch 30, and a lot of it was quarter-inch 15. That was the studio standard for a long time.
Quarter-inch 15.
Up to the 70s, and there was a lot of great music recorded before the 70s.
Oh, yeah.
Most of that was 15 IPS quarter-inch. And, you know, you find a good one and it still sounds awfully good. But some of that stuff that we got on half-inch 30 sounded pretty nice too.
Interesting. Yes, some people claim that the phase response of quarter-inch
Right. Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
is better than half-inch.
There's
and
trade-offs
definitely way better than
aesthetically.
1 inch. So what do you have to say about that?
The wider you go, the more critical azimuth becomes.
That right.
And 1 inch, clearly, as you align your machine, your azimuth peak is a lot narrower. And Mike Spitz, when he started making 1 inch versions of the ATR-100, he spent a long time, several years, experimenting with different things that he wanted to try with the transport to get the tape guidance consistent enough that he'd have consistent good azimuth. And he didn't start selling them until he felt he'd licked that problem. So yes, absolutely, it makes azimuth more critical. Doesn't mean it can't be solved. So it's not a drawback in the sense that you always give something up. It's a drawback in the sense that you have to be much more careful.
That makes sense.
Okay, yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So if you were, so here at Patrick Ewing, we record analog. We are analog fanatics. We believe in the format. We still think it's relevant. We still think it's superior to digital.
It's relevant as ever.
Yeah. We track to an Atari MTR-90 Mark III 24 track. The channel cards have been rebuilt by Alan Guerin of Waltzing Bear Audio, and they're far superior to stock. We have a Studer A80 Mark IV VU. There's a half-inch 2-track as well as a ATR-102 half-inch 2-track in the other room. That one has been modified by Waltzing Bear Audio as well. So we're big into this format. We are actually delving into the 1 inch 2-track format for the first time, and we picked up a machine from Dream Hire, the rental company in New York, and it was a good price. We actually got it for
Excellent price. Yeah.
$6,500,
That's a good price.
which is a very good price. What would you say to people out there who are interested in the 1 inch 2-track format? Let's say starting with an ATR-102, right, which would be one of the machines you might choose. What modifications will you make? Just give us your list of recommendations for this setup.
All right. I do like the ATR-102 as a basis for a 1 inch 2-track. If you have it set up at ATR service in York, Pennsylvania, they make a couple of modifications to the audio electronics and a couple of the power supply to make it work with optimally with the 1 inch tape, and that's a very good start right there. They also make a version using their custom electronics, the ARIA electronics, which are solid state electronics, sound very good to my ear. So that's an even better choice. I've gone beyond that with other electronics that I like even better. My first one has electronics, both record and play, made by Tim Paravicini at his company EAR in England. And
Are those tube or?
those are full tube, yes.
Are those NOS?
No, they, oh geez, I can't remember which tubes they use. I've had this since 1999, never had to replace a tube in those yet.
Well,
He knows how to
that.
make tubes last.
I believe
he's-
that, yeah.
You know,
That's great.
So I knew it one time, but I've forgotten because I haven't had to get back there
Sure.
and do anything with them. And it gets used a lot. That machine's getting a lot of work. And I just ordered another set of playback electronics actually for another ATR-100 that 1 inch that I'm in the process of building up. Anyway, it's a great way to go. The Studer A80, a number of people have made 1 inch 2-tracks on that platform. I'm also a big fan of the A80 transport. It's a wonderful, wonderful transport. I don't recommend making a 1-inch conversion using the stock Studer Electronics. I don't think they have enough headroom even for half-inch. I think they're quite limited on their headroom. It was designed at a time that they didn't believe you needed headroom. We now have hotter tapes. You put a 1-inch head on there and you're running much higher levels than they ever expected to. So you'd have to do something to deal with that, but you could still have a great machine.
Yeah.
In fact, in our duping room, we are playing back on an A80 transport, but we're not using Studer Electronics. In that rig, we have Ampex MR70 electronics, which were specifically set up by Tim Paravicini.
Yes.
A couple of modifications he made for better sound quality and to handle the Tim Paravicini curve, which we also use on our running masters.
And how much do these Tim Paravicini electronics cost for either the Studer or the ATR?
Yeah, you could put it on any machine.
Just how much would the core cost? How much would the playback cost separately?
Yeah.
Or does he just do them in tandem?
No, he sells them separately. He set up a couple of these machines for Pink Floyd at their studio in London in half-inch. They have a lot of invested in half-inch, so they've got a couple of machines of his. And Bob Ludwig has one at his mastering place in Portland, Maine, that's playback only, because mastering is what he does with it.
Right.
So, in fact, he got it at the same time that I got my first one. He had an ATR by Mike Spitz and Tim's Electronics, but he chose playback only.
Sure.
I'm not sure what. Let me just say, probably the one or the other, playback or record, might be around $10,000.
Oh wow, that's more than the machine itself, for
Well,
us at least.
Not if you not if you buy one from ATR that Mike Spitz set up.
Sure,
That was more than that.
Tens of thousands.
Yeah.
So we're talking. So in terms of stock ATR electronics, if you don't want to spend $10K, you're already in a pretty good spot for record.
Certainly for recording.
Yeah.
As I said earlier, I think the record electronics of a stock ATR are quite good.
Wow.
I have a problem with the playback electronics,
Right.
but if you're just mixing to it and sending it off and someone has a machine with really good playback electronics, you're going to do fine.
Great. So you don't go through the penthouse in the ATR-102.
Correct. Many people have listened with and without the I/O modules. That's the upper electronics, and found it bigger, clearer, punchier without. And I've heard the same thing, and so I simply don't use them almost ever. On our duping machines, we go in bypassing the penthouse. In fact, we've taken them off of our machines. You can go into the electronics down below, and we do. And
And
when
you
I
use external view meters for those.
yes, we have a special monitoring package that we custom built so that we can monitor all three of the dupers, and it includes meters. So that's how we align.
Yes.
And it can also monitor the input, so when I call up the oscillator, I get it to the level, and then I switch it over to the machine I'm aligning, and I've got playback meters. In the mastering room, I use an ATR-100 for my playback deck. When it's 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch, I am playing that using an earlier Mike Spitz playback electronics package that he made. It's hybrid FET tube thing, very, very nice sounding unit, and I don't use the I/O modules for that either. Just come right out the bottom into my mastering chain.
Wow. Okay. And then in terms of the PadNet cards, the audio cards, you're making some modifications to those. Are you using the 4-phase or the 4-speed or the 2-speed?
Yeah, we use the 2-speed PadNets.
Is there any reason for that?
They're much more common, really, and they do
Okay.
everything we need after
Yeah.
we've modified them.
It's
We
not a
give them
sonic
everything we
preference
need.
necessarily.
No.
Okay, so
The
what?
4-speed PadNets are good too.
So what do you do to change the PadNets modification?
We've modified those in our duping machines for flatter record response.
Okay.
and we have simplified the signal path. Just like we simplified the signal path by leaving out the I/O modules,
Right.
we've simplified the signal path on the pad nets by bypassing a couple of FET switches, so we can't switch it to 30 IPS,
Right.
but we're not going to. We're going to always be one speed, one curve. So we removed those switching FETs, and now the signal path is just a little more direct.
Right.
Then we've slightly changed a couple of capacitor values in the frequency shaping networks, and the result is that we're able to actually just get a little flatter response through the top end
Wow.
than we could with the stock parts on it.
And if you were recommending to a mix studio like us, because we're not a mastering house, would you make any modifications record-wise?
Well, of course, when you get your 1-inch machine, it'll have some modifications that ATR has developed for it, which gives you a pretty flat response already, and a little more adjustability in the low end, and a little tighter power supply all at once. The power supply modification I'm talking about is not in the main power supply. That affects your real motors, but they make a modification on the cards for the local power supply, and that tightens things up a little bit. I don't think you have to do anything else for the record side.
Okay.
As you know, I vote for better electronics on playback, but I think those record electronics just as good as you'll ever find. So,
Right.
yeah.
That's fantastic. So, in terms of mastering, what was your favorite converter? And like you've shot out a lot of converters. Just have you experimented much with DSD? What sample rate do you capture at? Bit rate.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious about this stuff.
Well, I've been pushing for high res in digital for a long time. I pushed a number of my clients to do the initial mastering at high res, and then we would of course have to get a 4416 CD master out of it. And sometimes they weren't sure I was really pushing them in the right direction. Now all of them are selling high res files off of those files we made initially, so it's been working out. I have been through a lot of converters, and the ones that I found, and it's not new at this point, it's getting to be a vintage piece of gear. The Pacific Microsonics Model 2 is still my preferred converter. I still listen to other converters. I found another one that I like quite a bit, the JCF Latte. Had certain sonic qualities that I liked. I would talk about it in the same breath, at least with the Pacific Microsonics. But the Microsonics is also a really well-built piece of equipment,
Right.
and has been chugging along for a long time without any hiccups at all. So I keep using it.
My question is, what do you capture at then? Are you 2496? Are you 2492?
There's
2424?
I'm happy to do 4X rates. That 176 and 192 are considered the 4 times sample rates.
What sounds best by the time it gets to 1644.1 after SRC?
There's more considerations than just what sounds best.
Okay.
If you master with plugins, there's very few that work at 4X rates.
Right.
So if plugins are important to you, then you're going to do 88 or 96. And you might have a preference between those two. If you think that 44 is important to you, you might choose 88 because it's a graceful conversion down. But if you're working in video, you might do 96 because you're interested in a conversion to 48 end product.
Sure.
Right.
But I like to do it at 192 or 176 because then I've got it. And as I told my clients 15 years ago, there'll come a time you can sell those. That time is now. You can put those up on HD Tracks or the other download sites, and have another income stream. People will pay extra for something that's at that higher sample rate. So I still do my initial mastering typically at either 176 or 192.
And what sample rate converter do you use?
Well, I don't like sample rate converters. I've never heard one that sounds good enough to me.
If your end goal were just to make the best sounding CD and we were actually discounting,
I would do it at 176 and use the Model 2 for the downsampling. It's internal.
Internal.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Better than any software sample rate converter
Really?
to my ear.
Wow.
And everyone's free to have their own opinions, and you will find other opinions.
Of course.
I'm only telling you what I've heard, and I'll only talk about what I've heard, not what I haven't. And that to me is still the best sounding. And I have done a lot of DSD work. I did a lot for several years, and then my customers weren't asking for it. And there were several years I wasn't doing it, and then lately I've been doing it again. I can't really say which one is the best sounding converter. When I was doing a lot, it was the Meitner, no question, but there wasn't much else.
Right.
Now there's a bunch of others. I've listened to some, and I haven't really found one that jumps out at me and says this is clearly better. So might still be the Meitners.
Sure.
Interesting.
What was that piece of software that we were talking? Because there's that one PC piece of software that people kind of swear by for conversion.
I think it's just the Sericon, the white stuff, but you're not crazy about it.
No.
Not really.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, this is fascinating. So, you think that capturing at, let's say, 176 is going to yield a better CD, for example, at 1644.1 than capturing at, say, 2444.1, just
Yes,
natively.
I do.
So it will sound better.
Yeah, I do.
Oh, interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
Because some mastering engineers still will capture at 44.1. So that's fascinating. I believe it. I mean, yeah, sure.
What in the character? Are there any particular character aesthetic points in that that come through?
Yeah, and it probably has a lot to do with what I master. I've done a lot of things over time, but I'm not doing much in the way of noisy rock bands these days. Doing much more acoustic music, from classical to bluegrass and beyond, and R&B so there's a couple of things that I'm always looking for. Well, I'm always looking for a vocal that's smooth sounding and appealing, and I'm always looking for a rich low end. I think all the music that I'm involved in, having a rich low end, even a bluegrass record, is a real plus.
Sure.
And since a lot of what I do also is for audiophile labels, and the labels and their customers care about spatial qualities, I'm always paying attention to those. So I'm drawn to gear that does a good job on all those qualities.
Yeah.
And techniques like capturing at high res
Right.
and keeping it high res as far through the process as possible. So that I do think makes a better CD, and then you've got a mastered version at 176,
Yes.
and you can create a mastered version at 8824, because they both go up on these sites,
Right.
and the customer chooses what they download based on what their equipment will handle.
Yeah.
It's interesting. A lot of the CDs I hear nowadays, they just don't sound very good. And I'm trying to, and obviously I'm taking into account that they're recorded digitally. That's one thing. Okay, yeah.
And crush and mastering.
Yeah, the masters are too loud. But there's something even almost other than that's an issue. And I've been trying to figure out what that other thing is. And does it maybe have to do with it not being a glass master? What's going on there? Is it plugins being used in mastering? Is it the fact that the mastering engineer maybe is capturing correctly, but then applying processing later down the road in the finalization what's kind of ruining a lot of modern CDs?
I think it happens a lot earlier than that. I think it happens in the recording and mixing.
Sure.
We're getting far off the topic of 1-inch 2-track, but I'm fine with it.
I wanted to go a little bit in this direction,
yeah.
though, because this is important.
Yeah.
What I found when I started doing mixing in the box
Yeah.
is that the more you load up your mix with plugins, the more you lose that fine texture and life. Most of these systems won't tell you when they're skipping cycles because they don't really have enough power to do what you're asking them to do. And what happens, and I've done it and I've watched other people do it, you're doing your regular mix process. Oh, this sounds this way. I'd like a little something. You put a plug-in on it, and maybe you're soloed and you're not even hearing what it's going to do when you're hearing everything together. And it does what you wanted it to do. You say, okay, good, we won. But then you don't necessarily realize immediately you've lost 0.5% in the sound quality of your entire mix. You do that 20 times, you lost 10% of your sound quality.
Right.
You know?
That's what I've always figured, is that people have had just way too much faith in their MacBook, you know. And that's where that who was that was telling us about, some guy had some setup somewhere with 4 giant Mac Pros, all, you know, Ethernet connected, running all these software synths, and that's when I finally hit me, is like, well, if that matters, then what's going on when you're running 100 tracks on a MacBook? That's okay. That makes sense. Yeah.
What is 30 IPS on the 1-inch format sound like compared to 15?
I know it's been a long time since I've listened to it.
Okay.
I did it in the very beginning, and I decided right then that 15 was fine for me.
Right.
Not just fine, I liked it better.
Yeah.
There's another aspect of sound quality we haven't mentioned yet that I hear in analog tape all the way through, but even more in the 1-inch, and that's a sense of wholeness, of a completeness to the sound. And most people don't even know what I'm talking about because they're listening to today's CDs all the time. It's not till you hear something that has that, you that's what I was missing over here. But 15 IPS creates that impression better than 30 IPS on the 1-inch. So that's why I chose 15 for everything.
And when you say wholeness, are you speaking both of hearing things discreetly and then all as one, or kind of, or are you talking about sort of a cohesion between the whole?
I mean the individual instruments and the overall sonic image. All of it.
I mean, that's the first time I listened to one of our mixes, just even off of half-inch. I had that experience, and it just, kind of changed my life.
There you go. You heard what I heard.
Yeah. So
interesting. And what about cabling? Are you a stickler for cabling? We are using the low capacitance Mogami cable right now for our balance cable runs. In terms of our instrument cables, we actually chose Mogami as well. We thought it sounded more analog, just more kind of old school compared to a lot of the more expensive boutique cables. What are you running? Do you hear a more analog cable or like a clearer cable? Yeah,
this is a thick swamp to get into.
I know, but that's why we're here, right?
I have spent a lot of time evaluating cables for sonic properties, and I do hear differences, and it isn't always the most expensive one wins.
Yeah.
I have had many experiences where quite the opposite, but it doesn't mean the cheapest one always wins either, and it doesn't mean the one that wins in this application wins in this other application. I think we're really dealing with interface issues, and if all interfaces were designed perfectly, we'd hear a lot less difference in the cables. Having said that, there are a couple of commercially made cables that I have settled on that work in the interfaces that I've got them in, and I've had them for several years and have been happy with them, keep them there. And then a lot of my stuff is cabled up with cables I actually make from scratch.
Oh, interesting. We might have to hit you up.
Well,
He's like,
we,
no.
Hands on
we will
stuff.
leave the details for later.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, I just have one more question. When you're using your ATR-102 coming directly out of the pad net and not using the penthouse, it's unbalanced, as you said.
Yes.
And you're operating at 0 instead of +4.
Right.
Do you ever run into any RFI issues because of an unbalanced signal, for example?
Well, not there. At home, I have a big RFI issue because where my stereo equipment is located, it has a direct line of sight to all the transmitters in San Francisco. It's on the mountain right to the south of me, and I have problems with phono stages and the tape also, because you're just hanging this big sensor out in free space and it picks up radio stations.
Yeah.
But in the studios that I've had over the last several years, once I got everything hooked up properly, I did not run into problems. Mixing balance and unbalanced, sometimes a little tricky. Once you get it sorted out, I have not found it to be problematic.
Oh, okay, fascinating. All right, well, I think we'll wrap up there. We could probably go on for much longer, but we won't. We won't. Thank you.
We'll save it for chapter 2.
Yeah, thank you very much,
Okay.
Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
So appreciative of you
Yeah.
coming into Patrick Ewing today, and we will hopefully see you again soon. Thanks
See
for
you around the
watching.
internet.
All right, bye.